Nicole taught me, if you have an opportunity to listen to the whole interview, almost all of it is about what she is already doing well and how she's going to bring that forward. And now it's about 3 weeks later, and I know she actually is bringing it forward, because you'll see the students comment on each other's interviews, so you'll see those on that same YouTube channel. Our final interview segment is Sarah teaching in a middle school with sort of middle socioeconomic level students. About half the students are special needs, IEP 504, ESL. She teaches 2 classes, a first period intervention class and a fourth period regular English class.
Okay, so I have told you, Sarah, quite unexpectedly that I'm setting the bar a little higher for you in this next question. And as I described before, what I'd like you to talk about is a way of describing yourself, your sense of both who you are as a teacher and what your main goals are as a teacher, in a way that would be applicable to both this first period intervention class as well as your fourth period regular English class, 8th grade.
I think I would just say I'm trying to be attentive to every student's needs and push every student to fulfill their individual potential, because in first period, they all seem to struggle in different ways, and in fourth period I find that it's the same idea. I have EL students, I have students who are so above the content, they're not challenged at all. So I really just want to focus on being as attentive as I can to helping. I mean, I can't ideally help 35 students in as much as I would like to, but I really want to find ways to accommodate activities to challenge all levels. I realized going over grading some assignments for the PAC that it's not about if they completed their work, it's not about if they wrote the whole paper, it's if are they getting the idea. And I can see that even students who are very challenged have issues with that, and EL students have issues with different ways of understanding the content. So I want to focus on not just if they complete the work, I want every student to do what's best for them, do what they have to do to get to that next level. So
the approach that I'm taking with both Sarah and another student teacher that you'll see on the full spread of videotapes is to ask them what do they think is central about their teaching, even if they're teaching 2 very different classes. And this approach was introduced to me by another of my student teachers that I wasn't able to excerpt because it was too long. And he said, I've noticed that my curriculum in my public speaking class and my junior level American history class is converging. And I didn't know what he meant. So I just interviewed him on that question. What do you mean by converging? And I think you'll find his response is quite interesting. I also recommend you look at Sarah's responses to her own interview, which she just wrote last night, and her responses to another interview. She's a very articulate young woman, as you might suspect. A broader context for understanding these interviews can be found in my blog, in not too complicated a way. It's just called Jonathan Lovell's blog. I'm very indebted to Diane Ravitch and her writing in my own writing, as you'll see. I think what we're concerned with here is a matter of teacher agency. That is how we give teachers a sense that what they do is something they have some control over, rather than being buffeted by forces outside of themselves. I think this is of vital importance if we're going to be talking seriously about both teacher training and teaching in the real world. In the 3 previous presentations that you've seen, we demonstrated ways to use the Harris approach with seniors, high school seniors, and beginning teachers. We're now very pleased to have Joe Harris himself reflect on our repurposing of rewriting.
Okay. First, I need to begin by saying what a deep honor it is to hear such thoughtful responses to and uses of my work. It's what every writer hopes for. But I also want you to know that really I'm just like you. I mean, for example, big fan of this book. I was watching Chelsea Peretti last night, and she uses a similar line, and that's sort of what we're talking about, how to usefully steal other people's work. Also, so I'll definitely be done by noon, so that we can hear from you guys. A good 15 minutes, and I do want to apologize in advance. All of my students, I had to link out of this presentation twice. And all of my students are used at such occasions to basically watching me look at the screen and saying, it worked at home, until one of them gets up and hits the right button. So maybe people do that for me at key moments. The odd thing about thinking about using rewriting is that I don't use it that much myself. And I'll try to tell you why. And actually, one way of getting at it, I think, is by going to a clip, one of my favorite scenes from one of my favorite movies, Andrew Bergman's The Freshman, which is about a film student at NYU in the early 1990s who gets mixed up with Marlon Brando and The Godfather, basically. But there is a megalomaniacal teacher named Fleabag, who has several just wonderful scenes that I find useful and cautionary. Here's one.
Gangsterism. Now, in the Fleabag treatise, Guns and Provolone, what point is made about the similarities between Karl Marx's Das Kapital, Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, and the Lake Tahoe scene from Godfather 2, Mr. Kellogg? Sir, you haven't read the Fleabag piece?
Oh, well, how many
You need tutorial help from Mr. Buszczak?
No, sir.
Well, perhaps Mr. Buszczak would enjoy helping you prepare a 5-page answer to my question, which I want on my desk by noon tomorrow. Mr. Glassman.
In an evolving society, violence and narcissism replace...
Shut up!
This guy.
So, to turn instead to the Harris Treatise. The reason I don't tend to use rewriting in my undergraduate classes, at least, is because I think that usually having just one of me in the room is enough for most people, and that they will get these concepts through alternate ways. I also am made uncomfortable by the scene just dramatized in The Freshman there, of asking people to explain me to me, and then saying that they've got it wrong. But there are occasions, in fact, when I have worked with rewriting, actually in a situation much closer to that of Kate and Carrie and Jonathan, which is where I'm working with student teachers, and the context that I do that in is teaching people how to teach first-year writing. This semester I'm teaching a seminar in teaching composition that has a group of 9 MA students who are going to go off and be the instructor of record in their own course in the spring. And it would seem odd to be directing such a program, talking about the teaching of writing without mentioning that I've written a book on the subject. So we do read rewriting and talk about it. And the way I've approached it is that I'm interested in trying to move students beyond mere understanding. And it's not that understanding is a bad thing. I mean, almost all serious intellectual work is grounded in some sort of fair and generous understanding of the work that you're dealing with. And if you miss it, you can't do much else. But I think the key moves of demonstrating and understanding are usually a kind of quoting, summarizing, explaining. They're moves that, while perhaps necessary, are rarely, I think, interesting in and of themselves. And when you simply drill people in demonstrating understanding, they get bored with it, as often, I get bored with it as their teacher. So the question is, for me, how do we move beyond understanding? And I was struck by a term that was brought up by several of the other speakers, this notion of repurposing. And it's not a term that I use in rewriting, but it's a very congenial one for me. It seems to me very similar to some terms that I do use, like borrowing and extending. And what we've heard from Kate and Carrie and Jonathan are ways in which they've taken my language and basically changed the context from thinking about working with student writers to thinking about working with student teachers. So it's a much more powerful way of dealing with the text, and I'm thankful for it. The difficulty that I have in my seminar is that we don't have quite that same shift of context, right? I am preparing them to teach a course much like the one that I'm talking about in rewriting, and to work with students much like those that I address, so that there can be some repurposing, but I feel like I also have to ask for something more. And that more is to ask students very directly, how can you add to the conversation, okay? Not simply show that you understand what a term like extending means, as Harris uses it, or even show how you can talk about extending in a slightly different context, but what are some words that are important to you as a teacher of writing? What do you want to bring to the table that is new, that contributes to our conversation? The great metaphor for this, I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, comes from, I see people nodding their heads, comes from the great critic and writer Kenneth Burke, who says, imagine that you enter a parlor. You come late. When you arrive, others have long preceded you and are engaged in a heated discussion. You listen for a while until you decide that you caught the tenor of the argument. Then you put in your oar. Okay? And I think there's a moment where we have to ask people to put in their oar, to come up with their key words and values. So that's what I've done in English 688. And if you're, let's see if this will work. Right, I knew that. Okay. If you'd like to look at the materials for the course, just Google Harris Seminar in Teaching Composition, and it will pop up for you. But students write responses to a series of weekly readings, and response 8 this semester was this. I say to them, in rewriting, I describe 4 key moves in academic writing: coming to terms, forward, encountering, and taking an approach. In this response, I'd like you to add to my list. Please identify a move that I don't talk about or give too little attention to, but that you feel is important for academic writers to learn, that you'd like to talk about next semester with your students. Define your move as clearly as you can, and if you can, try to come up with an example. So, I go here. Yes? And what's happening?
Forward, no, usually remote.
Oh,
There you go.
there we go. Pay no attention to the man behind you. So anyway, here's what the students in that class came up with, a set of, I think, very interesting terms. Synthesizing, structuring, addressing the audience, contextualizing, representing, counter-arguing, thinking, my favorite, taking a stance, and concluding. Okay, which in each case, this term allowed them to talk in more detail about something they wanted to do with their students that I had not mentioned, and also then to surface some of their values as teachers, right? And to begin to reflect and move forward in their practice, as the other speakers have discussed already. When I listened to the 3 talks that have preceded mine, when we're thinking about not rewriting, but rewriting our teaching, a number of terms came up for me that I think were new to the discussion, and that I wanted to just highlight and thank the speakers for. In Kate's handout, I'm not sure that she actually got to read this part, but in reflecting on her class, she talks about learning to forgive herself and her students for certain kinds of stumbles and to move on. And it struck me what a nice rephrasing of the term generosity that was, right? That had that kind of generosity and that forward movement. We need to be able to forgive ourselves, to forgive our students, to cut us all a little slack. Carrie talks about thinking of a lesson as a text, as a draft, work in progress, which I think is a wonderful way of thinking about it. I hope we have some time actually to talk about how you make a class of text, right? I mean, what are the things that you end up actually looking at besides your memory of what happened? What kinds of materials do you look at that help you textualize a class? And it's not a word that Jonathan's, but of Sarah's, although Jonathan prompted it, and I think, Jonathan, you have that wonderful knack of a good interviewer of appearing to do absolutely nothing, and yet the people you're talking with say all this great stuff. So I admire that. But I thought Sarah was just so thoughtful and so articulate. Really a winning person. And she talks about attentiveness, right? And learning to be attentive to, like we call them, the new particulars of each student, right? That's a lovely thought for any teacher to have, but particularly a new teacher working with such a challenging group of students. It's really nice. It really helps me, all three of these terms help me think about how I might revise my own practice as I move forward. So that's really what I wanted to leave you with, these added terms, really, again, terms that I've pretty much stolen from my fellows here. My question for you guys in the last 15 minutes, although you'll, I'm sure, have questions of your own, are what keywords do you want to bring to our discussion? Either terms that seem to have been left out of the discussion of writing so far, or our discussion of reading. And I did want to make one last request, which is you have here my email, jdharris57@gmail. I've got a website where if you want to read more of me or look at courses, you can find stuff there. And I'm on Twitter at Joe Harris at UP. I would love to continue this conversation beyond this room, but now we have 15 minutes to continue it right here. So thank you.
So if we could start by doing what we've done a couple times already, and that's church or partner, and just say for the purpose of taking notice, some questions that you had, just some observations that you might have had. So we're going to start just by talking to one another, and then I'll have some questions for the panel.
Nice to talk with you. Have a good conference.